Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth and final session of our webinar series on developing JavaScript applications with the Microsoft Identity Platform. In case you missed some of the previous sessions in the series, we'll pop a link to that in the chat window. But today, let's get started with how to get started with the Microsoft Graph SDK. And I'm going to hand it over to Sydney to walk us through that.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction. Hello, everyone. Really excited to be with you for our fourth and final part of our series on developing JavaScript applications with the Microsoft Identity Platform. This is a four-part series where we went through many different aspects of integrating with the Microsoft Identity Platform using that MSAL.js library. And the great part about it is that this fourth and final session is going to wrap up the series. So I'm going to just jump into a couple of slides here. As mentioned, the other three parts of this series there are available on YouTube right now. So we posted a link in the Q&A to our YouTube playlist where you can look at parts 1 through 3 if you've missed them. If you haven't missed them, then you're going to have a lot of fun today because we're going to build upon all the knowledge that we've been building up until now. All the slides you see on your screen, all the source code I'll show you today, that's also available. That we posted a link in the Q&A to the GitHub repo. That's github.com/msusdev. That's our GitHub org. And we have a repo, Microsoft Identity Platform Dev, where we have posted all of the source code and slides for today's presentations. I'd like to introduce myself, Sydney Andrews. I'm an Azure MVP. Do a lot of stuff on the developer side of Azure, and I've been working for many years learning, teaching, and writing educational content and material on Azure. It's a deep passion of mine. I'm going to try to answer as many of your questions as possible today. If you're here on the live session, just jump in our Q&A panel and throw some questions my way, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. But at the end of the day, I'm only human. I may miss a question. I may answer a question you're not satisfied with the response. You may be looking at a recording of this session on YouTube, and you say, hey, I didn't get a chance to ask a live question. Well, we have an email address. That's msusdev@microsoft.com. Once again, that's msusdev@microsoft.com. That's our email address. Please, drop us an email if you're trying to do these demos later and you're running into issues. We're going to try our best to help you out. And if we can't help you out, we're going to point you to the best place to go to get help. Whether it's from product team or somebody out in the field, we'll get you to the right people to get you through your challenges. So moving forward, we've had a wonderful series so far. We started off with using MSAL.js to authenticate users in our JavaScript applications. I see a typo on this slide. We have to fix it later. But we took the Microsoft Identity Platform. We learned how to manually authenticate, and that was a lot of fun. Helped us learn the mechanics of authentication so that the follow-up sessions will go a whole lot smoother. And those included like using the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, which is a set of components. We used them in React, and we were able to build a really rich application with a minimal amount of code. We also looked at how we can use MSAL.js to authenticate to Azure services. Specifically, we had a lot of fun authenticating to Azure Storage using MSAL.js, and that was really great. Helped us really understand how our scopes work and how our permissions work and delegated versus application permissions. But in a lot of the demos in sessions 1 through 3, you notice that we use the REST API for the Microsoft Graph, and we manually use things like the fetch method in JavaScript, or fetch function, in JavaScript, wherever we used it through our browser, and we pulled in a polyfill from npm. The idea was that we were still just going to the REST API manually. Today, we're going to look at the Microsoft Graph SDK, and we're going to look at how we can use that to create queries against the graph and add data to the graph in a much cleaner way that's a lot easier for us to digest. So 3 things we're going to try to do today. We are going to go access the Microsoft Graph. We're going to use fetch and MSAL, much like we've done for some of the previous sessions. Just as a refresher for those who haven't seen this yet, we'll just run through it real quick. You'll see me build out a little simple application so that you can repeat. And remember, all the source code you see today, that's on our GitHub. So you don't have to worry about, hey, you're moving fast and missing something. Don't worry about it. In step 2, we're going to add the Microsoft Graph SDK. So we'll fetch our profile manually. Then we'll do the same exact thing using the Graph SDK. Then we're just going to have some fun. We're going to use the Graph SDK to do a variety of different requests. And specifically, our goal will be to eventually add data to the Microsoft Graph. I think we're going to do a task list, and we're going to add a new list and add new tasks to that list. It's going to be, again, a lot of fun. So without further ado, that was my last slide. We're going to be all code from here on out in this final session. And go ahead and exit PowerPoint. I'm going to introduce you to our environment. We have Visual Studio Code. I have it open to an empty folder called MSAL.js. We have Windows Terminal. I have it open to the MSAL.js directory on my machine. And then I have Edge open to the Azure portal. I'm going to go into the Azure portal and create a new Azure Active Directory application registration. Let me turn my mask on. And then for this application registration, I'm just going to, well, I don't have any application registrations, so I'll create a new one called MS-US-Dev. I'm not going to worry about a lot of these settings. We talked about them deeply in the earlier sessions. I'm going to just leave this to be just accounts within my tenant, and that'll be just fine. And for my redirect URI, I'm going to create a single page application platform. And I'm going to type in HTTP localhost. And the server I'm going to use is going to use port 8080. So that should be more than sufficient. So when we do a login, we're going to redirect to HTTP localhost port 8080. Once I do that, I'm going to hit register. And that's going to create everything I need. My client ID and my tenant ID, I need to get going. So I'm going to just leave this up because I'll jump back and forth between this. We're going to go over to Visual Studio Code. I have pretty much an empty project here. I could use npm init to create a package.json file, but I'm going to create one manually. So package.json. And I'm going to create a JSON object. The name of this application is going to be example-app. We're going to have one script. The script is going to be called start. And I'm going to do something in that script. I haven't decided on what yet. And then I think that's going to be everything in my package.json object for now. Now I'm going to go over to Windows Terminal and I'm going to npm install. Now we've used HTTP server for past demos, but today to keep things super simple, super smooth, I'm going to npm install live server. And I'm going to save dev, which is going to save it in my dev dependencies of my package.json file. So hit enter. If I got everything right, go over here. There's my new package.json file. So name of my application example app. It has a dev dependency on live server. And when we start, I'm going to run live server. And this is really important. I'm going to enable CORS or cross-origin resource sharing. This is going to allow this is everything I need to create a simple web server that's going to allow me to build my sample application. Now I'm going to create an index.html file. And I mean, this is simple. I can do h1 hello world, save it, go to Windows Terminal, and clear my screen and run npm start, and it's going to run live server. Now, it's going to say, hey, everything's available 127.0.0.1 but on my local machine, I can also get there using HTTP localhost 8080. Now, this is important because if I use that port number, that's not the same as my redirect URL. So the application registration is not going to match with what I'm trying to redirect to, and I'm going to run into all sorts of issues. So I'm going to just keep it simple. I'm going to go to localhost 8080, and there's my application. This is a running live server. If I make changes to it, it should refresh live. So I'm going to just copy, and this again is on our GitHub repo, a really simple Bootstrap application, and paste that in. Now, what this does is it just brings in the CSS for Bootstrap and Font Awesome, creates a title, Node Bootstrap application, a nice little header, Node plus Bootstrap application, a button called Run Code, and a reference to my index.js script file. Now, when this button, if you click on click, it's going to run the run method. So I guess I need to go define that. So index.js, going to define a really simple async function run. And what I want to do in here, console.log running. Super simple stuff, right? So that's all I'm going to do. Console.log running, and then my HTML file. So if I go back, refresh, there's my Node Bootstrap application. There's my run code button. If I hit F12, there's my console, hit run code, and it's going to print a message running. I'm very weird. It says, hey, you need a fave icon. So I'm going to go steal one from another project. So I'm going to go to github.com, one of our own projects, not another project out there. github.com msusdev. This is my way of sneaking in how to find our source code. There's our Microsoft Identity Platform dev repo. This is where you get all the presentations and source code for everything I'm showing you today. If I click Microsoft SDK, Graph SDK for JavaScript, you'll see our presentation and code for everything we're doing today. If you go back to our organization, we have a project, really cool project called Example Static JavaScript app. I'm going to come back to this project a little bit later, but I already created a fave icon here. So I'm going to just go ahead and download that. And save it. And there we go. Error message goes away. Everybody's happy. So I have a fave icon file. All right, so we have a really simple application. I mean, this works fine. I could do some other stuff, like maybe I add a horizontal rule and then maybe a pre-formatted code block. Give it an ID of output. And then, I don't know, maybe we'll go document.query selector output .enter HTML equals now running. Just to show you, live server is just going to refresh this, hit run code, and it says now running. Think I need to put all this within the main because you notice a little formatting there. I want to put all that within the main so that it's nice and formatted with a little bit of padding. So this is our simple application. This is our base of operations. Now, what I promised to do first was actually walk you through how we did the MSAL.js in all 3 of our previous sessions. Well, I want to call out a couple things. First is that for our CDN, we use it unpackaged.com. Unpackaged.com is really great. It allows us to go in and pull files from an NPM package as a CDN. So it's really great if we want to bring in an NPM package. So I'm going to go in and let's go to npmjs.com, npmjs.com. And the package I'm mostly interested in is my MSAL packages. So it's really one I want to start with, and that's the MSAL browser. So Azure/MSAL, hit enter to search. There's the MSAL library, MSAL common, MSAL node, MSAL React. These are all packages we talked about in previous sessions. If you want to go back, look at a YouTube playlist. But the one we're going to use today is MSAL browser. This is the exact same one we used in session number 1. And it walks through examples, how to use it, where it is on the CDN. But one of the cool things about unpackaged.com is if I know the package name, I could go to unpackaged.com and say, okay, package name is at Azure MSAL browser version 2. And it's going to allow me to browse it here. Cool. So MSAL browser lib, MSAL browser.js, and I could do MSAL browser.js and MSAL browser min.js. Here's my minified JavaScript file. If I hit view raw, let's see, make sure I clicked it. So we'll make sure I click the right thing here. Hit enter. And give it a second. Let's see, my browser froze up, and I apologize about that. But what it'll do is it'll essentially remove this browse and take us to the raw file. And I apologize about my browser freezing up there for a second. We'll fix that. All right, so going back to Visual Studio Code, I could add a script tag. So let's see. Script source equals, there's my source file, and it's a cross-origin script. You can pass in the value, but I don't need to. It's one of the cool things about HTML5. And there's my MSAL browser library. So going back, nothing's changed with my code here. It's just I now have a really cool library that I can use. So if I go to my index.js file, I can go in and I can write some code. So I'll just start with a really simple MSAL client. I'm going to create our config constant with an auth object, with our client ID, our authority, and a redirect URL. Some of these we know automatically. HTTP localhost 8080 is our redirect URI. Authority is https login.microsoftonline.com/ and some tenant ID. And then our client ID is whatever client ID we have. And this is all, again, stuff we talked about in session 1, but I can go ahead and copy my client ID from the Azure portal, paste that in. I'll jump back to the Azure portal, copy my tenant ID, paste that in. And somebody asked if this session is being recorded. Absolutely. Is there a link to the recording? If you're watching the recording, this is in the same YouTube playlist. You hear the live session, we have a link in a Q&A to the YouTube playlist, and that will be where we post the recording as soon as this session is over. Or shortly after the session is over. So we have our config object. We'll create a new client. If our client equals new MSAL.public client application, pass in a config object. We'll go create a login request. So login request. Now it's going to want some scopes. That's easy. User.read. Since we're just reading our user profile, we will create a login response variable. We'll asynchronously call client.login popup with our login request information. And this is all stuff we've done before. Console.log, a login response, and print out the value of that login response variable. Now, the cool thing here is we'll save this, go back to our application, hit run code. This is my first time signing in to this MS-US Dev app. So it says, hey, it's requested user.read. So I'd like to sign you in and read your profile. Do I accept? Absolutely. I hit accept, and there's my login response with my access token. And I can use this access token to go grab a bearer token from the back end. And again, this is just like when we went through manually. We can even make it nice. We can go in and say document query selector output .inner HTML equals login, I don't know, JSON .stringify login response. Fun stuff, right? Go in and just run it one more time. Hit run code. Notice it goes through pretty quickly, and there's my JSON object. I don't know. We can make that a little better. We can go in and JSON stringify has a couple extra parameters. Like, do you want to replace anything? Nah, I'm not going to replace anything. Well, how many spaces do you want to format it? 4 spaces. Let's try that. Run code. And there we go. We got a nice little formatting. We have information about our account, claims, and our access token we're going to use to get a bearer token. All right, so let's continue, right? We have our login response. I'm not gonna write any of these out to the screen, just comment these out. Let's create a token request. So token request, you'll notice is very similar to login request. We started with our scopes, which is also user.read. We're not gonna change that, but we'll also provide our account information, which is login response.account. Now, let token response equals, and I'm going through this fast on purpose because we talked about this in our first session, but I just wanted to walk through this one more time. We're going to acquire a token silently since we don't need to pop up again using our token request, and we will console.log token response, printing out our token response. And I'll do the same thing again. This is just fun. Document query selector. Instead of login response, it would be token response. And I'll make sure I remove that slash. Okay. Going back, here's our live reload. We'll hit run code. Let me make sure I'm signed in. Apologize. It says, hey, you're signing in a lot. So I'm using, for those who can't see, I'm using my phone to sign in right now. I have passwordless login. It's one of the coolest things if you've never set it up before. All right, there's a login response, a token response. Here's a token response. It comes with everything we need. Everything's looking great. We're going to comment this out since we don't need to print that out to our application. So we logged in, we have our token. Let's actually go to the graph. So we're going to go to our browser. We're going to go to aka.ms/ge. Actually, I'm gonna open this in a new tab, aka.ms/ge. For those who've never been here before, I'm putting in the Q&A. aka.ms/ge is the Graph Explorer. This is gonna allow us to explore the Microsoft Graph. Here, I'm gonna just issue a GET request to graphmicrosoft.com version 1.0 me endpoint. That's gonna get my profile information. If I go to the Graph Explorer and select Modify Permissions, there's lots of different permissions that can give me this, but user.read is the simplest one, so that'll be fine. It gets my profile information. Everything looks good. Let's run with it, right? So graph.microsoft.com version 1.0/me. So let's just do a really simple fetch. This is fetch graph.microsoft.com version 1.0/me. If you remember from our first session, we did a bearer token header. So we're going to do that here. So headers, authorization header. It's going to be a bearer token. So bearer token, and then we're going to pass in our token value here. That's token response.access token. All right. Fetch is asynchronous, so we'll await the response to that. We'll store the response in a variable called payload. So far, so good. We're going to get the JSON of that response. So that's just payload.json, which is also a synchronous method. So await that, store that JSON response in a variable called JSON. And then we'll log into the console. So console.log, graph response. There's our JSON data. And we'll do the same fun thing one more time. Document query selector, enter HTML, JSON stringify, our JSON, which I don't know if we even need to do that, but that would be all right. We'll just format it anyways. Can't hurt, right? Save. And so I basically created a simple application that gets my profile information and prints it here. That's it. We've built a manual application using MSAL.js. I mean, we can make this fancier. We can go to highlightjs.org and pull in the highlight.js library. I believe for the highlight.js library, we can get that off of Unpackage. I'm actually thinking through it right now. If we go to, I'll open another browser tab, unpackage.com. It's highlight.js. Let's see. Highlight.js/cdn assets. It says, okay, there's no index.js file, so we'll just browse. There's a highlight.min.js. Okay, that looks good. Let's open that in a new tab. Highlight.min.js. We can either hit view raw, or we can just remove the browse, and that gets us to the raw JavaScript. So we'll just add this JavaScript in. Index.html, script, source. And I'm doing all this manually because what I found is a lot of people come in the middle of session 2 or session 3 on our online recordings and haven't seen the first sessions. And sometimes, you know, we can be a little quick way we describe things. So that's our JavaScript file for highlight.js. They also have style sheets. We're going to just do the default style sheet because that's kind of fun, right? We'll do default.min.css. If we remove that browse, there's our default style sheet. We'll pop that into our file too. So again, all of this is on GitHub if you want to, you know, follow along. Style sheet. This is cross origin too. Save. And then the last thing for highlight.js, it says, hey, when you're using it, two things. We need to call highlight.js.highlightAll. And if we don't think it's going to automatically sense the type of code in there, we should add a class to our code file with language hyphen the type of language. So we'll do both of those. So hljs.highlightAll. And I'm just having fun here. This is so far above and beyond what we normally do, but we just want to have fun with it, right? And then our code will add a class, language JSON. All right. Let's go back to our application. Run code, get my profile information. Nice little syntax highlighted. We can add there's all sorts of types of themes here. We did the default theme. We can do VS 2015, which is the Visual Studio Dark theme, I believe. Just show you fun here. There's the Visual Studio Dark theme. I believe there's a GitHub theme. GitHub, save. Uh-oh. There we go. Run code. There's a GitHub thing. Lots of fun stuff. We're just having a joy here. All right. I like the GitHub thing. I'm going to stick with this for a little while. But if you didn't like that, you can just use I believe it's the ves.min.css. Run code. And that's the Visual Studio thing. We'll play around with this. This is good. So from here, what I like to do is I've used MSAL.js. I've queried the Graph SDK manually. I like to do all of this with the Graph SDK. So going back to npmjs.com, we can pull down the Microsoft Graph client. It's at Microsoft/Microsoft Graph. And you'll see all the different things for Microsoft Graph. The library we're interested in is Microsoft Graph Client. Now, we can pull this lots of different ways, but essentially, I'm going to just use unpackage. So the latest version is 3.0.1. Let's do it. At Microsoft Graph Client at, I don't know, let me try the 3 shorthand and see if it gets me anywhere. So the latest version of version 3. Ah, we're cooking. We're going to go to the lib folder, and there's 3 files in here. There's the Graph SDK, a JavaScript file, and the different providers based on whether you want to provide a token credential or you want to use the MSAL browser. Cool. So we're going to do both. We're going to grab the Graph SDK and JavaScript. So just like I showed you before, I'm going to remove the browse. And the same thing is clicking the View Raw button. I just like to show you that that's what the View Raw button is doing. And get the Graph SDK JavaScript file. Perfect. I'm going to go pop that in my application. So I'm going to need 2 script tags. Script source, cross origin, script source, cross origin. One of them is going to have my Graph SDK library. And then the other one is going to have that MSAL browser authentication provider. Since we're already using MSAL browser, why reinvent the wheel, right? So we'll delete that and we'll get access to this raw JavaScript file. We'll pop that in here too. And now we have the Graph SDK loaded up in our application. We're ready to cook. So I hit save. Here's my index.js file. We're calling the graph manually down here, but let's see if we can do something better. So I'm going to get rid of a couple things. I'm going to get rid of my login token request. And I'm going to simplify all the way down to, here's my config object that configures my MSAL browser client. And then I have the MSAL browser client use a public client application. That's all I need from MSAL. Now, from that point on, I can move on to using the Graph client. And this is where it gets a lot of fun. So Microsoft Graph.client.init with middleware. And this allows me to pass in some options on how I want to create my Microsoft Graph client. So we create a constant for options. And I have off provider is one of the options. And this is where it gets a little funny. It's MS Graph off code MSAL browser off provider dot off code MSAL browser authentication provider. That is a that's a mouthful. But pass in my client, and then I want to make sure I got all the syntax correct. And then we pass in an object with settings for this. All right, that's my authentication provider. All right, so settings. If we already have an account, we can pass that in. I don't, so I'm just going to pass in an empty object here. What scopes do I care about? User.read is the one scope I'm going to care about right now. And then what type of interaction do I want to enable? Interaction type. Well, MSAL has an interaction type called pop-up. And this is case sensitive. Let me make this an uppercase I. I'll save, pass in those options to init with middleware. And here's what it's going to do. It's going to create a graph client. So I'll store that in graph client. And this graph client is interesting because here's where I configured that I want to do a pop-up interaction. So all that manual login with pop-up, all that other stuff is already handled for me. I just need to tell it that I want to interact with pop-up, and this is the scope I care about. And the graph client middleware initialization using this MS Graph off code MSAL browser off provider will handle all that code for me. So at that point, if I save just to make sure I have no typos, I'll go back to my application, hit run code. Nothing's happened because I haven't called the graph, but nothing's broken either. So that's what I wanted to see. Let's actually call the graph. So we have the graph client. and it has a function called API, and this is where you pass in your relative path. As soon as version 1.0, so all I need to do is pass in me, and then my HTTP verb. So I'm going to call get, and this will be my profile data. So await it since it's asynchronous and store in a variable called profile. I will console.dir my profile data, and I'll call document.query selector, just like we did earlier. Output, should have put this in another function, but that's okay. Inner HTML equals JSON stringify. My profile data, null, 4 spaces. I'm just doing it all manually so you can see it. Not trying to hide things behind other methods, right? Hit run code, and there we go. It was able to go to the Graph SDK, get my profile information, and print that out. I forgot to call HLGS.highlight all. I believe that's the right name of it. So run my code one more time. There we go. All right, we're cooking. So that's how I get my endpoint, but that's not the only thing I'm interested in. What if I wanted to go deeper to the graph and get other data? So for example, what if I wanted to get all my to-do lists? So I'll go to Microsoft To Do, and I want to get my to-do list. So it's me/to-do list. The permission I need is task.readWrite. I hit run query, and I get all my to-do lists. There's toolkit components and code snippets in different languages, but you notice it says, hey, when you call client.api, go to me to-do list to get this same place or get the same data. So it looks like I have a JSON array of to-do lists that are associated with my profile. Let's try it out. So instead of me, it's me/to-do list. I'm just going to, instead of profile, I'm gonna call this response. That way we don't have to keep rewriting stuff. But console.dir to response and then print out to our output. So our response from me to-do list, let's try that. Go back to our application, run a code. And this is, access is denied. What you might have noticed is in the Graph Explorer, it says I need task.readWrite permission. I didn't put that in my scopes here. So let's do that. Task.readWrite, save. Go back to my application, run my code. It's going to give me the pop-up because I gave permission to user.read. However, I haven't given permission to task.readWrite. You notice it added a new entry, create, read, update, and delete tasks and task lists. So this is what I need. I hit accept. And there we go. There's our JSON data. So we have lots of task lists in here. I created quite a few for past webinars. Let's create a new one. Let's create a new task list. We get our task list. That's pretty simple. But I want to create a new task list. So I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to call this list. Let list equals. And that's I can set all sorts of properties, but the only one I care about today is display name. Where did I get display name from? Well, if we go back to our application, we'll see that they have is owner, is shared, well-known list name, ID, OData, E-tag, and display name. This is the only one I want to set. So I'm going to create a task, a list. And the display name for this list is going to be, I don't know, MS US Dev Awesome Webinar. All right. So this time, instead of calling a me to-do list get, I'm going to call post, and I'm going to post this list. Now my response is going to be a set of lists. It's going to be just this newly created list. So I hit save and go back here and hit run code. There's our new list, MS US Dev Awesome Webinar. Pretty awesome stuff. If I go to Graph Explorer, run this query again, I see that I have, I believe it would be at the bottom, MS US Dev also webinar in my list of lists, right? So I can do the same thing here in code. So I go back and we just did a post to list. We could just do a get one more time. Save, go back to our application, run our code. We have our set of lists. There's MS US Dev also webinar. Cool. Now, we just created a brand new list, but we want to get the different tasks in that list. Now, this is a brand new list. It should be empty, but how will we figure that out? Well, every list has a unique identifier. Here we go. Our unique identifier is this really long value. I'm going to copy that. And essentially, the way we do that is we go to list / the unique identifier. slash, and I think if you just go to list slash unique identifier, you just get the metadata about that one list. Now, if you go from here to task, you get the task in that list. So let's do that. So we'll do some string concatenation here. So me to-do list, and I'm going to put in some type of list ID slash task. So let's see, const list ID equals, I'll paste in my nice little list ID. And so this should give me an empty array of tasks since I haven't created a task in this list yet. So I'm going to just jump in, run code, and there's our empty array. Cool stuff. Now, what if I wanted to create a task within this list? Let's do that. So let task equals, and I'm going to create a JSON object. Now, if I don't know what a task look like, I could just go back to the Graph Explorer, get my to-do task list. See that I have some other lists. I have a really simple one here. It's just called tasks. Let's see if I have an example of a task here. And I'm just riffing right now. Now, each task has a lot of different properties you can set, but the only one I care about today is the title property. So that's the one we're going to set. So we have our to-do list, we have our tasks. We're going to set the title property. Email msusdev@microsoft.com if you have any questions today. That's going to be the title of our task. You hit save, and instead of getting from the task list, we're going to post to the task list our new task. And going back to our application, we're going to run code. And we created a new task, email msusdev@microsoft.com if you have any questions today. And if we go back, just rewind a little bit. And instead of posting our new task, we'll just get the list of tasks in this task list. And that's a tongue twister. Run my code. I'll see that email msusdev@microsoft.com if you have any questions today. We were able to just jump right on in and get the data we're interested in. So I really wanted to show you that as a really, really cool way to get started with the Graph SDK. There's lots of different ways you can go here, but build upon everything we've done in this series to date. The Graph SDK is just a really nice way where we don't have to manually call fetch and configure the MSAL browser, client library, or mess around for bearer tokens. All of that can be handled in the library for us, and we built a really cool application here that you can play with yourself. Just want to show you real quick, github.com/msusdev is our GitHub organization. If you go to Microsoft Identity Platform Dev, you'll see all the slides and code from everything we showed you in this entire series. The Microsoft Graph SDK for JavaScript presentation here is where I have a lot of this example code that I'm showing you now, including some stuff that we may show in a future session. We're just working out, you can see in real time, we're working out some new demos to make this even more fun. But all the code I just showed you today is all up here, so you can go in and recreate this yourself. One other thing I wanted to show you is if you didn't want to manually build out your own application, within our MSUS dev org, we have an example static JavaScript app. This repo is really cool. I'm going to pop this into our Q&A for those who are following along. This is the exact same sample application I just showed you where you can build out your own Bootstrap application. If you go to example branch, it already has all the code to go to MSAL. You just plug in your own client ID and tenant ID, and it's a great starting place if you don't want to have to build everything out from scratch. Now, didn't see that many questions. I'm going to hang around for a little while to see if anybody has any additional questions. While I'm hanging around, just going to pop this slide back up with our msusdev@microsoft.com email address and our demo source code repo. And just see if anybody has any questions today. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't seen our past recordings, they're on our YouTube channel in a YouTube playlist that we shared in Q&A. msusdev@microsoft.com if you got any questions. github.com/msusdev is our GitHub org where we post presentation source code, not just for this webinar, for all of our webinars. And I shared two links today. One is to our example static JavaScript app sample application, and the other is to the aka.ms/ge Graph Explorer. All right, I don't see any further questions, so I want to thank everybody for attending today, and I'm going to hand things back over to Sakshi.
Thanks so much, Sydney. I also wanted to let everyone know that we have another webinar that you'll be doing with us in January, and I'm going to pop a link to that in the chat window as well. But in case there are no more questions, thanks everyone for joining. Happy holidays, and we hope to see you in the new year.